In the middle of the old part of Bamberg, Germany, where I lived for a few years, you can find the historic brewery Schlenkerla. First mentioned in 1405, the art of brewing beer in those days was similar to brewing today. Schlenkerla Rauchbier has preserved the old craft tradition of smoking the malt. The smoked beer at their brewery tavern is still being tapped directly from the wooden barrels according to old tradition. Therefore, you are having a little piece of beer history with every swallow. I'm Jeff. I just retired from the military, sold everything I own, and now I'm traveling around the world to learn from brewers, winemakers, distillers, and tell their story. This is my journey of beer, wine, and spirits.
So Martin, tell me, how did you get into brewing?
During school time, beer was my hobby, my favorite drinking, and so I thought I could study this. And I studied in Weinstefan from 1976 to 1981, and then I started brewing in several breweries.
How did you get involved in Schlenkerla and get a job here?
Oh, I heard that the old brewmaster would retire, and I called here in and we talked about the job and conditions.
And you've been working here now 21 years.
21 years,
Making Rauch beer.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My name is Matthias Trum. I'm the sixth and second youngest generation at the Schlenkerla brewery. My children are 3 and 6 years old, so quite some time till they take over. Though the big one already can tap beers from the wooden barrel, so he's quite proud of that. The Schlenkerla history dates back quite far. We have the first documentation of the brewery tavern back in 1405, so almost 100 years before Columbus even discovered America. The Schlenkerla was mentioned. At the time it was called the Brewery of the Blue Line. Over time the name changed to Brewery Heller, because the brewmaster who owned it was Johann Wolfgang Heller. Then in the 19th century the name changed or got amended by the word Schlenkerla. Schlenkern is a Franconian expression, a vernacular expression for not walking straight, when you limp and dangle your arms. And one of my ancestors, my great-great-grandfather, Andreas Graser was his name. According to legend, he had an accident in the brewery and he was limping after this accident. He was walking on a stick basically and dangling his arms to keep the balance. The locals, the regular customers, they gave him that nickname of the Schlenkerla, the dangling guy. And they said, okay, let's go to Schlenkerla tonight, referring to the person. But eventually it became synonymous with the tavern, and ultimately it became synonymous with the beer. Nowadays there are some people that say when you had enough Rauchbier, then it's going to make you Schlenker. So by funny coincidence we got a brand name, as they call it today, which really stands symbolic for the beer in a way as well. So the special and historic thing about Schlenkerla is, from today's point of view, we're not only a brewery, we're also a malting operation. Traditionally, all the breweries would have made their malt themselves, and the industry maltings we know today have only been around for 150 years or so because of the industrialization. The malting process is fairly straightforward. We take barley from local farmers, from local suppliers. This is first steeped, meaning it's soaked in water. Then it starts to germinate, to grow, and after 1 week of germination, we stop the germination process by drying the then so-called green malt. This drying process is done with hot air. All the modern industry maltings do it in the same principle. They also use hot air. The special thing about Schlenkerla is that this hot air does not come from a modern heating system with gas or oil-driven heat sources, but rather from a traditional open fire. We use beechwood from the local Franconian beech forests. This beechwood needs to lager for 3 years in order to dry sufficiently, and then we make an open fire underneath the kiln. The hot air and the smoke rise up, they go into the kiln and they dry and kiln the malt. After the malting operation, the brewing process is pretty much straightforward from a traditional German point of view. We mill the malt, we mix it with water. That's called the mash. The mash is heated up in a certain way. Certain temperatures we make breaks so that the enzymes can break down the starch into sugars. After that, it's brought to the boil. The hops are added, so we have the wort. After the brew house, the copper vessel brew house, we go into main fermentation. From there on, we're pretty modern. We have all stainless steel fermenters. Closed fermenters, not open fermenters anymore, just for hygiene consideration. When you have open fermenters, you might get bacteria from the air inside the beer, which then could result in off flavors in the final beer. Main fermentation is about 1 week. The classic Schlenkerla Smokebeer is made with bottom fermenting yeast. After the 1 week main fermentation, we have the next historic step in the production of Schlenkerla. We still use the rock cellars underneath the brewery. They're about 15 meters underground. And these rock cellars date back to the 14th century. Now, the important thing about the rock cellars is that they have a naturally low temperature all throughout the year. Without additional cooling, they would stabilize around 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. Just by coincidence, or maybe due to certain historic connections, this is the perfect temperature for bottom fermenting yeasts to ferment and mature the beer. We have modernized our rock cellars, so we don't use wooden lagering vessels anymore, just for hygienic considerations. Nowadays it's stainless steel, but it's still in the historic spot underneath the brewery. So brewers have been lagering and maturing the beer there for 600 years or so. We give our classic Schlenkerla Smokebeer quite a long time to mature, to fully develop the flavor. We have at least 2 months of lagering time. Modern industry breweries either don't have lagering time at all or do just a couple of days. After that maturation time in the rock cellars, we fill it into wooden barrels for our own brewery tavern, just to have the most historic flavor background to the beer. And for other customers, we fill it to modern kegs for normal taverns, and also to bottles. And in those bottles, it goes to local shops, to supermarkets, and also a small portion goes to the international markets these days.
Out of your
no problem at all.
schedule to tell us and the rest of the world about the most historic beer in the world.
I got your line there. Cheers.